Hey guys, it's Erica, and in today's video we're going to be doing a full care and propagation guide for your string of hearts plants. Now, I have some really great news, which is that this plant is one of the easiest to care for, and they are one of the fastest growing plants also. This is one of my favorite plants, and I'm so excited about this plant. I actually did a propagation video on this plant when I first started my YouTube channel, and it's kind of embarrassing, but to emphasize how fast this plant grows, in that video I propagate a plant, and it was very small back then, and here it is now. And this is after cutting multiple pieces off to propagate it. For some reason it has this little hoop going on, so you can't even see the full length. But this is absolutely so massive as to what it was when I first had it as a small little baby. Watching it grow has been so exciting to me. So yeah, this should just give you an idea of how fast it grows, and it's so easy to care for because this plant is one of those plants that you kind of want to neglect. It will appreciate it if you neglect it. To start off, I think we're going to talk about the watering situation for this plant, because I feel like this plant is one that is very easy to overwater because it really does not like being watered often. But it's kind of like, wow, I haven't watered this plant in a long time. I feel like I should water it. And then it might turn out to have been too soon. And it's kind of very prone to root rot. So there are two ways to check if your plant needs to be watered. One of them is checking if your soil is completely dry. Your soil needs to be completely dry. Even if the soil is a little bit damp, I wouldn't recommend to water your plant yet. You can have a little soil meter, stab it in there, check to see if the soil's dry, and then you can have the go ahead to water. The other way to check if your plant needs water, which is my preferred way, is to feel the leaves of the plant. So I have my little variegated string of hearts here. And what I will do is go to the base of the plant and feel the leaves at the base of the plant. If they are hard, that means that they do not need water, because the leaves are hard because they are full of water. They're water retaining leaves. So this plant does not need water. Go around the base of the plant, check if all the leaves are either hard or they will be squishy if they need water, because it has used up the water source that it had. And that's how you'll be able to tell. But just a little caveat for when you're using this method: newer leaves on this plant are not as thick as old ones would be. So kind of the more mature leaves, the leaves that have been here longer, are kind of thick. Like, they're very thick. And then the newer leaves, as you can see here, are thin. So you usually want to test this out on leaves that are thicker instead of going for a leaf that isn't as thick. And I feel like you'll know what I'm talking about when you feel the leaves of your plant. The younger leaves that just came through are not as thick as the older leaves. So if you're kind of like squishing a younger leaf to see if it's squishy, it's probably more likely to be squishy, even if your plant doesn't necessarily need to be watered. Like I said, if you're going to use this method, go for the thicker leaves. And that's what I do to know that my plant actually needs water. This plant loves bright and direct sunlight. And you can even give it a little bit of direct early morning sunlight or late afternoon sunlight, because the sun isn't as harsh when it's coming from those angles. So you can do that. I keep mine in an east-facing porch, so they do get a little bit of that direct morning sunlight. For my variegated ones, I don't give them any direct sunlight because I'm really scared of burning them. This one, I recently moved it a little too close to the edge of my porch, so you can see these leaves have been burned. So you do want to keep that in mind. Don't have it too close to somewhere where direct light can get on it, because the leaves will burn and your plant will not like it. this big plant that I have right here, I keep under my grow lights. So you can have one of these plants under grow lights and they will keep growing and live, because you can see here this plant is really long too. And depending on the amount of light you give your plant, its variegation will kind of look different. This plant that I keep outside, that I've been giving it more light, it has reddish colored, purplish. And for this plant that I keep indoors, this plant has more of kind of a green look. And there's not really any purple on these leaves because they are not getting as much light at all. So just keep in mind, different amounts of sun will change the appearance of your plant. That's fine as long as you can see them actively growing. They're probably doing well in the situation that you're giving them. But definitely the more indirect bright sunlight you give them, the faster they will grow. And trust me, they do grow fast. My plants right now are still actively growing, and we are in December, so almost full on winter. It's almost winter time. It's still fall, but we're getting very close. Soil requirements for this plant, nothing too crazy. I definitely recommend a well-draining soil mixture. I would say maybe only 40% of coco coir or peat moss, and then the other 60% can just be aerating components like perlite, orchid bark, or pumice. But I do recommend, if you're going to use orchid bark, to stick to a finer or a smaller size orchid bark. I think that covers pretty much everything about this plant. Fertilizing, you can just use a gentle fertilizer in the summer and spring, and fertilize them maybe every 2 weeks, because these are fast growers, so I think they would appreciate the nutrients. You can even fertilize them in fall because they still pretty much actively grow in fall, and probably cut it back a little bit in the winter time. But now we can move on to the fun part, which is propagating this plant. So there are 2 different ways to propagate, of course, and that is by soil or by water. Regardless of whether you're going to propagate your plant by soil or by water, you want to find a place to cut, and that is going to be below a node. These leaves are connected to a node of the plant, which is this little bump here. So what you can do is cut a little bit below the node. So I'm going to cut my plant right here. Have disinfected shears. You can dip them in some alcohol really quickly, and that will disinfect them perfectly. So like I said, I'm just going to cut below right here. And this is the strand that I'm left with. So I'm going to remove this leaf from the bottom node, just like that. And you want to be careful when you're ripping off the leaf to kind of grab onto the node and pull it that way, because it can kind of shred the stem like a string cheese. So you want to avoid that, and to avoid that, you hold on to the node as you're pulling the leaf off. This one is going to be one that I'm propagating in water. Once you remove the leaf from the node, you can just grab your little water flask and place it in like so. So this is my little propagation. I just slid it in there. It's a lot easier when you use a vessel such as this one, where it's kind of like a little vase with a tiny opening so that your plant doesn't fall into the water, because if you let the leaves touch the water, they will rot. So to prevent that from happening, having a little vessel with a small opening is going to help prevent that. And then once you leave your plant in here for a while, it will grow lots of lovely roots. It might also grow flowers. Often when I propagate these plants by water, they grow these flowers. So you can see this one here that recently came in. And you can definitely leave these flowers on here, but what I like to do is I like to kind of pull them off, because when the plant produces these flowers, it's using energy to make them. And what I want is for it to focus its energy on growing roots. So I pull off this flower so it's no longer taking up the plant's energy. And we just toss that away. These I keep in a south-facing window, so they do get kind of really hot sun, hot, bright sun. So I keep the blinds closed on there because otherwise they will not be happy. They will burn. But these plants are ready to be potted. So let me show you these roots on these guys. You can see here that they have a little ball formed and they have roots growing from it. And this root system is perfect for this plant to be put into soil. There are also some little balls along the stem, and if you place those under the soil, then they will grow roots as well. For now, I'm just going to put this little guy back into his water tank. So you can see another ball here, and they're pretty much just aerial tubers. So when you plant them into soil, you can put a little bit of soil on top of these and they'll grow roots. So that's pretty much everything you need to know for water propagation. Again, you just keep them in bright and direct sunlight, same as how you care for the plant when it's not being propagated and it's just in soil. And then my favorite way of propagating this plant is in soil. And here I have this is a little propagation of my variegated string of hearts. This little chain fell off the plant, so I popped it in this soil and it has been doing well. Right here at the base, you can kind of see a little tuber is forming, and then over here, there is growth. And this has been in soil for so long now. I actually am not sure of the date. So I'm going to be propagating using this little guy, and I'm just going to find a chain here where I can cut. And I'm just going to cut below a node like I did earlier. This is what I cut because this leaf is looking a little bit funky. And what I'm going to do now is I have my little bucket here. I have my little pot, so I'm going to fill it with soil. This is my soil mixture that I made. And I'm just going to fill this up with soil. This is how much I filled it with. You don't need to fill it to the top. You can if you want. But now there are two different ways that you can do this. So I can just stick this plant in the soil, lay it down like I did with my other one, like so, and it will grow probably roots from each node. Or I can cut so that each node has its own little separate section, and that is the way that I'm going to be showing you. So right now I'm just going to cut in between each node. So I'm cutting here in between the nodes of the two plants, or the two leaves, and I'm cutting here. Perfect. And the last one, I'm just going to leave them connected because they're really small. Now what I'm going to do is place each little node so that it's kind of dug into the dirt like that. You don't need to push them in too deep. And this one's a little bit deformed, so we're going to have to try and work with it here. So just like that. Make sure not to cover the leaves. This one here. Place it in. And this is what I am left with. So I have this one, and then I'm also going to propagate another chain like this. So I'm going to move this one aside, and I have another little pot that I'm going to fill with soil, and I'm going to do the same like I have been doing. So I'm going to grab my little chain, and I'm going to cut below a node, just like that. And this is the chain that I'm going to be placing into the soil. So here I'm just going to lay this down kind of in a little circle, and it is pretty much the same idea as the first little cutting we did. Just bury that under dirt a little bit. Make sure the nodes are touching the soil, they come in contact with the soil. The next step for this is optional. So what I like to do is I put my plants that I'm propagating into these little bags for humidity. So for string of hearts, there is a little kind of risk in putting them into these bags. So since string of hearts are kind of like succulents, they don't need humidity. Sometimes the humidity helps the plant grow, and sometimes it kind of rots the leaves. For example, this chain had 2, 4, 6 leaves when it started, but 1 leaf rotted from this one and 1 leaf rotted from this one. And that's kind of the chance that you take when you put your plant into a humidity little chamber. You don't need to put it in a plastic bag. It can be in like a little box that you can cover, anything to kind of contain the humidity. But I like to do it this way. So pretty much just the difference between these two methods of propagation is that you have one long chain here and then you just separated each of the nodes in this one. You can do whichever you like best. This one will result in more separate plants, and this one will just have kind of one big plant. So now I'm going to place these little guys in their humidity chamber because I like the method of the humidity chamber. It makes it easy to kind of keep track of watering and whatnot. So I have my little bag here, very festive, and I'm going to write today's date. So today is the 12th of December, and I like to do this because, as you can tell, I didn't write the date on this bag, so I have no clue when I propagated it, and it just kind of makes it easier to keep track of how long your plant has been propagating for. Put both little cuttings inside the bag, and I have my little spray bottle here. I'm just going to spray them down very thoroughly. I'm pretty much saturating all of the soil of this plant. I'm not being careful to not get the water on the leaves or anything. I'm just spraying a lot. Okay, so I've sprayed down my plants, and now I'm just gonna close the bag almost completely, but I'm gonna leave this little part open so that a little bit of fresh air can get in. And this is what we're ending up with. I'm just gonna keep this in bright and direct sunlight. I'm gonna keep mine right next to an east-facing window, so it's gonna get that good morning light and a lot of ambient light throughout the day. Normally, when I put my plants in these kind of humidity chambers, I will kind of check them out every week and spray them weekly, but for string of hearts, I tend to wait longer in between when I spray my plants. So usually I'll just wait until I don't see any more condensation on the bag, and then that's when I'll know to give it a good spray. If you see some leaves kind of dying and rotting away, that is fine if you have your plant on a chain. If you have your plant just like the little node method, it's kind of stressful to have it like that. So that's kind of where you have the benefit and drawback of splitting up each node. If you have each node, you're going to get more plants in the end, but they have only one node to try and survive off of. So there's kind of that little factor to take into account. But this is definitely my preferred method of propagating this plant. You don't need to keep it in a humidity chamber if you don't want to. You can always propagate without having it in this environment. I just like it in here because that's how I like to propagate my plants. Oh, another thing that I forgot to mention is that variegated string of hearts do grow at a lot slower rate than non-variegated string of hearts, and that might be why my little variegated string of hearts hasn't shown signs of any roots yet, but I'm not worried about it because this has been in here for quite a long time, and the fact that these leaves are still alive is telling me that this plant is kind of working on developing those roots. Okay guys, that is it for today's video. I hope you found it informative and helpful. If you enjoyed the video, you can give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if that would make you happy. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!